liberty. With a victory in their hand, they took a stand for the land. Independence seems to be the word, the boldest shout you ever heard. North Carolina said it first to make that royal bubble burst.
And if it's a Tuesday 8 a.m. hour, as it is on this 21st of April 2026, it's Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. Dave Bowman's joined us throughout the day. He's going to bring us a look at history when we get there momentarily. Headline at BillMick.com, religion, psychedelics, and government. That covered our first couple of hours. Now we're going to go to the foundation of that government, as we've done over the last more than a year with Dave's Liberty 250 series here on Bill Mick Live, as we've taken a look at all the specifics of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence that led to this document. And Dave, you say now the word is independence. Where are we going today, pal?
By the middle of April of 1776, the mood of the nation had changed. Most people by this point had consumed common sense. It was still in its, 12th, 15th printing, who knows. People were talking about this. And as Abigail Adams wrote to John Adams in March, independence seems to be the word. The problem is that while this climate is brewing, while all the people are on board with this, and the traditional reckoning is that a third are patriots, a third are loyalists, a third are, I tend to discount that. I think it's probably closer to 50 to 60% are on board as patriots, while that 1/3 loyalist is pretty satisfactory. The bottom line is independence seems to be the word. And as that mindset is going through, you would expect then that the people in charge would be doing something about that. Well, it was called Congress then. It's still Congress now. So Congress is absolutely paralyzed. They do not know what to do. They don't know how to do it. And despite people like John Adams, pushing for independence, despite other things going on, you've got some colonies, New York in particular, that are just paralyzed is really the only way to describe it. They don't know what to do. The people that they've sent to Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress are without instructions. Think about this. The royal governors, for the most part, have fled. So who's actually in charge in the states that are sending the people to Congress? So, of course, they don't know what to do.
And this also after they've disbanded local legislatures, right? The colony legislatures.
The British did. The British disbanded them. We reformed them.
Right.
But
in the bars.
Right. But even those, right, down to the tavern we go. But even those don't have instructions because really no one knows what to do. What they do know is that independence would be seen as treason. Are we really ready to cross that bridge yet? And while we're debating whether we should cross that bridge, as we talked about, the British tried to cross the bridge, and that led us where we are today, which is a little town in North Carolina called Halifax.
And we get there in just a minute here on WMMB. Dave, if I'm getting this right, Halifax, North Carolina is becoming either the kindling or the spark to the fire of independence here.
North Carolina is surprisingly perhaps the most best example of how the country is functioning at this point. We don't think of North Carolina as the spark, and we certainly don't think of them as the leaders of the American Revolution, but that's our own fault for not really knowing our own history. Generally, the colonies are still in this idea that they can reconcile with the governor, with the British crown, and maintain their self-governance. See, that's the idea. We'll still be loyal to you, but we want to govern ourselves. And, of course, George is never going to go for that. We're going to maintain this loyalty to the British crown, and we're going to tolerate a very low risk of being accused of treason. We're a little nervous about those kinds of things, even though we don't like what the king is doing. Now, in North Carolina, it's a completely different world. In North Carolina, you have a violent split in the state, which is just a powder keg. You have the Patriots, who are mostly from lowland Scotland, and Irish. A lot of that population living in North Carolina, and they are really hardcore patriots. They are strongly resisting the government. They forced Josiah Martin onto that boat out in the river. And then you have the loyalist element of this, which, as we talked about, were primarily Highland Scots. Remember Scotland and King George, broadswords and King George. And they were fiercely loyal to King George III, and this has created a very divided populace in the state. And North Carolina has made it clear that they have decided that the only solution to this is, we were talking last hour about realizing that there are solutions. They have realized that really the only permanent solution to this is a permanent break and total independence from Britain. There's no way we can reconcile with these people. There's no way they're going to give us self-government. So that means we have to go our own way. That means we're going to have to actively sever those ties. As Jefferson will later write, sever the bonds that have bound them one to another. And they don't really care about the risk. They're not worried about whether or not this is called treason or not, because they figure we're going to win anyway. And so they're willing to pioneer the movement for sovereignty. Now, all of this is building in North Carolina. All of this is, this coalescing idea. And through all this, as we talked about, the British have this Southern plan where they are sending troops to North Carolina at Governor Martin's request. The idea here is that he is going to take these troops. He's going to take 7,000 troops from England that are on their way. They've been promised. They'll be here soon, is all he knows. There's a couple of thousand troops from New York that are coming south, and he has those Highland Scots that are going to be loyalists and the regulators as well. This friction is building in, of all places, North Carolina. Now, in all your studying and all your reviewing of all your history lessons of the American Revolution, how often do we talk about North Carolina? Very rarely.
Not a lot. But you know what I hear in what you're saying? I see the attitudes of the people I grew up with in West Virginia, in Appalachia, where we had the descendants of the same people there, and those attitudes can still be found there.
Yeah. It's surprising because everything that we think about is New England,
right?
The Adamses and the Sam Adams and John Adams and Patrick Henrys and those sorts of things. Of course, Henry is Virginians, but we kind of overlook how active the Carolinas were in this. And what we're going to discover later on is that some of the most vicious fighting of the American Revolutionary War is in South and North Carolina. In fact, South Carolina actually has the most battles of the American Revolutionary War, and almost all of them are between Loyalists and Patriots. So there's a lot of stress here. We talked about, Bill, a few weeks ago in February about the battle at Moores Creek Bridge. And hopefully you remember this. Sure. It was a Patriot militia that, for all practical purposes, tricked the Loyalist militia into attacking them across a very narrow bridge in the middle of the night, a bridge that, by the way, they had pulled all the planks off of and just greased it up. So basically it's a death trap. Sure. And all these Highland Scots who were still wearing their kilts, because that's what they do, I guess, had tried to charge across that. It didn't work. Old Mother Covington blew their first lines away, and many of them fell into the creek, which actually was pretty deep. And because of their heavy kilts and heavy broadswords, somewhere between 80 and 100 of them died in this failed attempt to shatter the Patriot cause in North Carolina. That battle ends the idea that the British are going to bring all these troops in here and split the colonies in half. Number one, Henry Clinton and his troops, they're not really interested in all this. Number two, by the time the troops get there from England is still months away. So by the time they get there, then they're going to realize that, hey, there's really no way to land here. I don't know if you've ever been to North Carolina, but it's not exactly a haven for port cities. It's right. Just not. It's a very difficult thing, and that's with modern ships. Imagine trying to do that with a sail-powered ship. It's just not going to work. The whole thing completely fails. And this is going to lead the people of North Carolina to convene their fourth provincial Congress. Now that they've gotten rid of the governor, we're going to have another provincial Congress. 83 delegates from across North Carolina are going to assemble. And they're going to go to this little town called Halifax, which is in kind of the northern part of North Carolina. And they will meet there starting in April. And their task is to figure out what we're going to do now that we've won this battle. And what they're going to do is still on the North Carolina flag today. If you go look at one right now, you'll see on that flag, April 12th, 1776. And that is what we will talk about. It's known as the Halifax Resolves. And it all comes back to independence seems to be the word.
And that's next on Bill Mick Live on this Tuesday on WMMB.
This is Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live, where the past isn't dusty, it's loaded, and sometimes still ticking.
That's a good way to put it as we put you through the rigors of history on Dave Does History. And now, why independence is the word, Dave's taking us to Halifax, North Carolina. Dave, what do we got here?
So a month or so after the battle at Moores Creek Bridge, the Fourth Provincial Congress of North Carolina gathers in Halifax, North Carolina. Now, there are 83 delegates from across North Carolina, and the idea here is to figure out what we're going to do. There is a desire for a permanent break from Britain. It's overwhelming. One of the people that's there is a guy by the name of Colonel Robert Howe, and he actually says those words. Independence seems to be the word, which is exactly what Abigail Adams had said. But then he adds this: I know of not one dissenting voice. Everybody's in agreement. This is what's got to happen. North Carolina, of course, is, as a colony goes, it's not powerhouse like New York or Virginia. It's very unlikely that North Carolina, had it declared its own independence, could have succeeded, but they're pretty fired up about this. And if you know anybody from North Carolina, you know they're pretty set in their belief that North Carolina can do anything. Well, it's here that they will start to do this. As they gather and start to debate, they're going to form a select committee because, that's what Congresses do. So on April 8th, they appoint a 7-member committee with the following mandate. They are to look at exploring defensive measures, and they are to set pen, quill to parchment, and they are to detail the colony's grievances against King George III. So all those grievances that we've just been through, all these things we've been talking about, they're going to write all that down. Seem familiar to you? Now, this committee is chaired by a guy by the name of Cornelius Harnett. There's a guy by the name of Alan Jones, Thomas Burke, Abner Nash, John Kenshin, Thomas Person, and Thomas Jones, all of which are names which you will not be expected to remember here. But the next time you're driving through North Carolina, kind of look around and see if you pick up some of those names, because it might surprise you what's named after who when you go through all these things.
Town of Cornelius, north of Charlotte.
Exactly. There are towns named after those people. And this is what they did. They were that select committee whose job was to figure out how they were going to defend North Carolina, because they were still expecting the British troops to arrive, by the way, and to write down, we say that again, to write down the detailed grievances that the North Carolinians had against King George III. Hopefully by now you're starting to realize that by the time Thomas Jefferson puts pen to paper, he's really just kind of copying everybody else's work.
A little plagiarism for the Declaration. Why not? We pick it up in a minute. This is Bill Mick Live. So, Dave, what did this select committee in Halifax, North Carolina, commit to writing that would later be plagiarized by Jefferson?
Well, perhaps plagiarize is a little bit, humorous, I guess. But the idea here is that North Carolina kind of taking the lead on this whole thing. So this committee sits down, and for 4 days they busily synthesize years of grievances against the government. They put it all into a formal mandate, and they explicitly cite the king and Parliament for unlimited usurpation of power, the military's devastation of the country, the seizure of American ships at sea as prizes of war, and the actions of royal governors like Josiah Martin, who offered protection to enslaved people who took up arms against their masters. This is an uncomfortable truth about things. I mean, it was 1776, folks. Slavery was a deal, and to the Carolinas in particular, South and North Carolina and Virginia, Lord Dunmore's move to free slaves was seen as highly inflammatory. In fact, as we talked about at the time, that probably did more to unite the southern states to the southern colonies to the northern colonies than anything else. But they were very particular about these things. They were very specific about the actual grievances that they had toward King George III and towards Parliament. They wrote all this down and, of course, presented it to the delegates at their little Congress there, the 4th Provincial Congress of 83 people in Halifax, North Carolina. And on April 12th, 1776, they submitted their report. The Provincial Congress barely even debated it. There's almost no record of them debating the issues there. As Colonel Howe had said, independence seems to be the word, and I don't hear a single voice saying anything to the opposite. It was unanimously adopted almost instantaneously. But that's not good enough at that particular point. The document went so far as to encourage national unity. In other words, it's not just us declaring independence. It's not just us saying that. We are physically and emotionally and functionally encouraging the rest of you states to get on board with that. In other words, New York, Massachusetts especially, since you've been the leader in all this, how come you haven't gotten on board with declaring independence yet? You imagine, if you know a North Carolinian, you know what I'm talking about. Can you imagine North Carolina getting in your face and saying, get with the program? They also called for the authorization of forming foreign alliances. If we're going to be our own country, let's get some help. And they specifically reserved the exclusive right for North Carolina to form its own constitution and pass its own laws. These were all the things that were contained in this Halifax Resolve that they passed on April 12th, 1776. And if you go look at the North Carolina flag today, you will see that date on there, April 12th, 1776, as a reminder of the fact that North Carolina was the first colony to say specifically, yes, we want independence. Yes, we call for independence, not just for ourselves, but for the entirety of the 13 American colonies, and get out there and get us some allies as well, because we're going to need them. And, oh, by the way, we're still a sovereign state. So long before the Articles of Confederation, long before the Constitution of the United States, state sovereignty was already an issue in the American colonies. And it was North Carolina that first put that idea out there. If that were all they did with it, you'd kind of go, okay, great. But remember, Congress is still meeting in Philadelphia and is still paralyzed. And so North Carolina takes the next logical act, which is to send this to Philadelphia and say to Congress, independence seems to be the word. Get with it.
We pick it up there next.
From muskets to microphones, the story carries on. This is Dave Does History, right here on Bill Mick Live.
The one segment we let you in during Dave What Does History. If you have comments or questions, it's 321-768-1240. Good to have you along as we're in Halifax, North Carolina, sending North Carolina's own declaration of grievances and the like to Philadelphia, Dave. So you're telling me the idea of sovereignty for the states originates at this Halifax conference and apparently catches some fire when it gets to Philadelphia, huh?
I don't know if the idea originates there, but it certainly is put down on paper for the first time there. And, of course,
it could be later plagiarized by Jefferson. Yes.
Yeah, state sovereignty is one of those issues that we could spend a lot of time talking about and did on Constitution Thursday. But yeah, it's North Carolina that puts that in there. They take these resolves, they print them up very quickly because that's something Americans are really good at, is printing stuff. And they rush these things north to Philadelphia. Philadelphia's 3 representatives in Congress, a guy by the name of Joseph Hughes, William Hooper, and John Penn. They take that document because this is significant. I mean, it's calling for national unity. You other states need to declare your independence too. You need to do these kinds of things. But it specifically authorizes those 3 men to vote for independence. What it does not do, though, and this is something that's important, is it does not authorize them to introduce the idea. It sounds like an obtuse legal point, but it's important. It does not authorize North Carolina's delegates to say, hey, Congress, let's declare independence. But it does authorize them to vote for it if it comes up. This serves as a critical turning point when Joseph Hughes delivers this document to Congress. It begins to open the door in Congress for actual discussions of sovereignty as a nation, which had hitherto been considered treasonous. All of a sudden now, North Carolina is willing to go along with this. The rest of us should be as well.
I'll jump off the bridge if you do.
Yes. Who's going to be first?
Yeah.
So if you're looking at a timeline here, you've got February 27th, the Battle at Moores Creek Bridge. April 12th, you get the Halifax Resolves, which is still on the flag today. This is going to lead to the other colonies essentially doing the same thing. Now, the order is somewhat surprising. Obviously, North Carolina's first on April 12th. Rhode Island, of all people, will follow on May 4th. Actually, it's probably not surprising that Rhode Island it wants to be independent of everybody, and they declare independence. They don't just authorize. Rhode Island will actually declare independence. They'll actually say, nope, we're done. Virginia is third. They will authorize this in May of 1776. And they will go one step forward from that. They will actually authorize their representatives to open up the discussion, to introduce that resolution for independence in Congress. It's followed by Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, finally Maryland, and South Carolina. You'll notice that New York never actually does. And New York still hasn't, to this day, authorized its delegation to vote for independence. And as we'll see a little bit later, that will have an impact. It's this domino effect that leads to the June introduction of the resolution by Richard Henry Lee to become an independent nation. So only a few months after these resolutions, these resolves at Halifax are adopted, Cornelius Harnett will stand on the platform there at Halifax, North Carolina, and he will read the words of the Declaration of Independence to the people who really, for all practical purposes, started it. And to this day, the enduring legacy of the Halifax Resolve is still celebrated on the North Carolina state flag, which bears the date April 12, 1776. And they're fiercely proud of that, as they should be. Now, before you send me the emails, because I can hear you doing it, there's also another date on the North Carolina flag. Anybody know what it is? May 20th, 1775. That date is there because it's what's known as the Mecklenburg Declaration. In May of 1775, North Carolina declared its independence already, which may be why the Halifax Resolves didn't necessarily see the need to do that. And so they put that date on there, May 1775, in celebration of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, which North Carolina claims as the first Declaration of Independence. Delaware would disagree, but there you go. The problem is, of course, it's kind of apocryphal. There's no actual surviving documentation of any debate, any actual declaration. There's no historical actual evidence that the Mecklenburg Declaration actually occurred. Now, again, absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence, as historians like to say, but North Carolina claims it anyway, and that's why those two dates are on their flag. The one that really matters, April 12, 1776, we know that that happened definitively because it leads to Congress actually getting its act together and saying, hey, you know what, as Abigail Adams wrote, independence seems to be the word.
Dave Bowman with us. Dave does history. So, Dave, I can imagine just a bit of trepidation as these colonies, tired of what they've been going through, but now, instead of what would have been treason, it's now flat out, oh no, this is defiance. We're leaving. We'll see you later.
It's a remarkable shift in the American mentality. And again, we've talked about this all the way from December when Thomas Paine publishes Common Sense, and it just sort of catches fire in this whole idea. And it's a remarkable occurrence because it's not Congress leading the way. It's the people leading Congress. And that, I think, is important to understand. And that's why these Halifax Resolves are so amazing, because they come from a people's gathering in Halifax with instructions to Congress, do this.
Maybe we need that lesson today.
It certainly seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Let's get to the phones. Line one, you're up on Bill Mick Live. Good morning.
Good morning, Bill. Ed in Melbourne.
Yeah, Ed.
I watched a miniseries on Netflix, The Men Who Built America, about Daniel Boone. He was from North Carolina. He went over into Kentucky, and the British didn't like that. And I didn't really realize how much Daniel Boone played a part in the Revolutionary War. So, Dave, what's your thoughts on that?
Daniel Boone was a man. Yes, a big man. Yes, he plays a big part of this whole thing. Interesting thing about that is, yes, he went over to Kentucky from North Carolina, but Kentucky was actually part of Virginia. And that'll actually become an issue in the later part of the American Revolutionary War and in the Constitutional Convention. We almost didn't get a convention, a constitution in 1787 because of Kentucky. So Daniel Boone had a big part of that, and Fess Parker was great as Daniel Boone.
We'll explore that one day, we hope. Let's go to line two. Good morning. You're on Bill Mick Live.
Good morning, Dave and Bill. This is Keith from Palm Bay.
Yeah, Keith.
Did their march to sovereignty start with splitting up from South Carolina? Did North Carolina lead the split up of those two, and did they carry on with the sovereignty idea into the whole colonies?
Interesting question. Thank you, Keith. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand. Is he asking if South Carolina split from North Carolina?
If North Carolina split out of South Carolina, and that's where they had this sovereignty idea.
They were formed as separate colonies. South Carolina is, while certainly one of my favorite places to be, South Carolina has a reputation for being somewhat prickly, I guess, that North Carolina doesn't seem to have. No, but it is interesting that the state sovereignty thing comes in there. And again, North Carolina made that clear in their resolves. We reserve the right to form our own constitution, which is a word they actually used, and to maintain our sovereignty.
You know, if the other colonies were considering that at the time, that they're each going to need this sovereignty to basically rule themselves, even though they were aligned together.
Some of the other states already had their own constitution, Massachusetts, for example, Virginia. But this idea of putting it on paper, this idea of actually saying it, because remember the English Constitution is not written. It's interpreted. It's a common understanding of things. And so this idea of writing these things down was a little bit unique, but it was also purposeful in the sense that it gave direction to things.
Interesting. Let's get back to those phones. Good morning. You're next on Bill Mick Live.
Good morning.
Hi, Mario.
Dave, have you written any books? The reason I'm asking is I love your presentation. You bring history to life for me. You know, I'm right there with these historical people, and I'm wondering if that could be translated into something I could read also. I'm just curious.
It's a great question, Mario. Dave, you got any plans? I know that, you know, you keep meticulous records of the things you do here, and these words you're spouting are always recorded.
I have not written any books, and it's not currently in my plans. I will share something of my philosophy of this whole thing with you, which is that I believe this should be absolutely free. Same with my podcast, why I don't charge for anything. Everything that I do is on my website, davedoeshistory.org. And at some point I want to gather this particular Liberty 250 into a singular device that would be there. In many cases, there are transcripts there, that kind of thing. But
maybe a Broadway show.
Maybe a Broadway show, which could be next week's podcast since we won't be here. I just don't believe in charging for things. And while I would like to have my name on a book, I don't want to charge for it.
Well, and if you're not going to charge for it and nobody's going to pay you to do it, you're going to pay to have it done. So there's that side of it as well.
Website's free. You can read it for free.
Yeah, and that is davedoeshistory.org. We've got links to Dave Does History on today's show page at billmick.com. That headline, Religion, Psychedelics, and Government. It's been a fun day with Dave Bowman here on Bill Mick Live. Hit those links to Dave's stuff and our podcasts. Well, you'll find ours. Top of the page at billmick.com. You can also make them favorites on the iHeartRadio app. Hey, tomorrow, boys and girls, a wide open Wednesday. Cops, courts, and probable cause. Dave, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Hey, in Halifax, the leaders met the greatest plan you ever bet. They wrote it down on April 12th, into the future they